Hi guys, welcome back to Nairobi Legal Insights. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the rights and duties of employees. By the end of this video, you must be in a position to know what does an employee mean as far as the Employment Act of Kenya 2007 is concerned. Remember that someone may take advantage of a person who is an employee by saying that they didn't actually employ them. So we need to understand what does an employee mean. Then we're going to look at what happens when an employer refuses to pay an employee's salary. And remember also then there are circumstances where a person is employed but he or she is not given a contract of employment. So if you fall in this category as a person, how do you go about it if someone goes ahead to even deny that they ever employed you? As you can see, this slide discusses what an employer should do upon recruitment of an employee. Legally, according to Section 9, read with Section 20 of the Employment Act of Kenya, an employer must actually issue a contract of employment, meaning that the moment you've employed someone, then write a contract of employment. And we have Section 10 of the same act that sets out the minimum requirements for the employment relationship. So you can already see here there's a requirement to write a contract. There's emphasis that is actually put on the employer because he holds the responsibility to draft this specific contract. And remember that once a person has been given a job, then according to the law, they must be issued with a contract not later than 2 months after beginning employment. And if a contract happens to be oral, then the responsibility will be upon the employer to go ahead and put it in writing, as you can already see. And the key sections here, as I've already listed on your screen, are sections 9, 20, and section 10. The next key part I want us to appreciate is that what happens when an employer denies his employee. Now, we can have a situation whereby an employer denies having employed someone and claims that he or she is not his employee. Now, in most cases, an employer will want to avoid liability because we know that employees have certain rights and duties according to the law. And so we can have an example here whereby an employer claims that the person is just a commissioned agent and not an employee. Now, once this happens and you are in a position of being an employee and the employer is denying that you're not his employee, the duty is upon that particular employer who is denying this relationship under Section 74 of the Employment Act of Kenya to actually produce work records, statements, or any material that is relevant that can actually prove the nature of the relationship that exists between that particular employer and the person he's claiming not to be his employee. So you can see here that even if you're in a situation whereby you entered into an oral agreement with the employer and they go ahead to deny that you're actually not their employee, the duty is upon them to actually prove the nature of this kind of a relationship. This goes to show you that an employee may not easily be taken advantage of by simply not providing a contract to them or by just waking up one day and denying them. You have to prove the kind of a relationship that existed, and that duty is placed on the employer. When it comes to keeping work records, it is the duty of the employer to actually ensure that these records are kept and they are produced at all material times, meaning that even if there is no contract of employment, at least an employer must have records, that will guide the court to appreciate the kind of relationship that particular employer has with an employee. So as you can already see, it's very hard for an employee to be taken advantage of. Even where there is no contract, an employer must produce evidence or any records to actually prove the nature of the relationship that existed between that employer and the employee. We also need to appreciate that not issuing a contract of employment leaves the employer-employee relationship exposed. What I mean here is that in most cases whereby there is a disagreement between an employer and an employee, and the two parties had an oral agreement, and the employer can't even produce any record, what will happen is that whatever dispute arises might actually favor the employee, because it's the duty of the employer to reduce an oral contract into writing. Moreover, we have Section 10 of the Employment Act of Kenya that actually spells out the basic minimum requirement that should go into a contract of employment. So, if a person wants to draft a contract of employment, the guideline is already set out under Section 10 of the Employment Act of Kenya. And we need to appreciate that these details are set out in this particular section actually help the employer to write a contract of employment once he or she engages an employee. It's very important that a contract is reduced into writing. And so it is also a legal requirement, according to the Employment Act of Kenya. And once this is taken for granted, then the contract may be interpreted for the benefit of an employee. An example would be that if there is an oral contract and a person is supposed to receive 70,000, and then a few months later the employer is actually giving this person 15,000, and this person goes to court because they have not been paid for a period of 7 months, the court is more likely going to actually force the employer to pay the original 70,000 even if it was an oral contract. Remember that not reducing a contract into writing will actually benefit the employee, meaning that whatever was agreed upon orally is what is going to be taken into consideration, because over and above that the employer failed on his duty to reduce the oral contract into writing. In the next video, we're going to be discussing about what happens when an employer fails to pay an employee's salary, and we are also going to be reviewing probationary contracts. So please consider subscribing so that you receive notifications every single time we post a new video on labor law in Kenya.